Got nowhere to put my Bible. I don't have my notes. So I put my stand up. So if I do this and I just drop it, it's habit. It's habit. Today is one of those sermons that a seminarian loves. Look at this. Ready for this? 15 verse 1. We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not please ourselves. Verse number 2. Let each of us please his neighbor. Verse number 3. Christ did not please himself. This is like T-ball, guys. It's like Paul just set me up for a perfect sermon. The ball's there. All I gotta do is swing. We got 3 pleases. Point number 1, don't please yourself. Point number 2, please your neighbor. Point number 3, because Christ did not please himself. It actually works. But I'm not gonna swing at that because it's almost too easy. And the temptation is just from a preaching standpoint, is just to rely on that structure. Generally speaking, that's where I'm going today. Don't please yourself, please others, because Christ did not please himself. But rely too much on structure, and I think you can lose a lot of what Paul's saying. We're just going to rip open Romans 15, start at verse 1. As you go back, it reminds me of when I was 15 years old. I remember this day clearly. I was learning to drive. My dad was in the passenger seat. And he was like, let's go on the interstate. Man, 15-year-old boy getting ready to hit 70. I think it was 70 at the time, 65, 70. I don't know if we were in a station wagon or a minivan. Regardless, it was going to be exhilarating. But I had to merge onto the ramp. You merge onto the ramp lane, depending where you're at, and then you merge onto the interstate. Well, when you merge onto the ramp, there is a yield sign for me, and then the other traffic next to me is just moving. I didn't know what yield meant, so therefore you kind of just disregard it. And so I get into my lane, I just merge over, and without thinking, all of a sudden my dad grabs the wheel and just jams it back over. And there's a moment of chaos in the car. And I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, you're supposed to yield. And, I was thinking, said, well, okay. We collected ourselves and we move on the interstate. But my dad could have yelled at me, right? He could have said, Greg, he said, are you an idiot? Yield means yield. You could have killed us. You could have wrecked the car. No, he took control in the moment, and then as our heart rates began to slow down again, he explained to me what yield meant. Romans 15:1 is kind of to me, a picture of that. Look at this. We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Paul waits for us, what is to us, an entire chapter to call himself strong. I don't know if that means anything to you. That means something to me. He could have went back to the very beginning of this topic in Romans 14 verse 1. He could have said, as for the one who is weak in faith, the strong should welcome him. But he doesn't say that. He says, as for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him. And it makes me wonder, why does Paul wait so long to call himself strong? Strong in faith. To me, a couple of thoughts on it is, one, is he doesn't want those who are reading this to quickly jump to the assumption that they're strong in faith, because, number 2, because Paul lays out an obligation to the strong. That we'll see here soon that the buck stops with you. That you have a duty to raise up those who are weak in faith in the love of Christ. So I believe he waits a long time because he doesn't want us to jump. Right? If it was me, I want to label myself as strong, not weak, because I like to flatter myself. But the reality is, there are areas in my life that I'm weak in faith. We talked about this last week, and that weakness in faith can lead to doubting, which leads to self-judgment, which leads to self-condemnation, which leads to sin. So Paul says, we who are strong, and Paul labels himself as strong. He says, He says, I'm strong. He says, I'm speaking, I'm preaching to myself in this. He says, have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak. Just like my dad bared with me as I did not understand the yield sign. You're going to run into people in the church, this church, other churches. You're going to run into people that don't know the Lord that will be weak. And how do we deal with those people? Because some of those people simply, they could just have just begun their faith journey. And they just simply don't know. They don't understand the gospel. They don't understand the freedom of grace. And there's a way that we can respond to them. And Paul uses the word to bear with them. There's others that may have been under false teaching for a long time and they're stuck in a rut. And there's a way to build them up out of that rut. And this is what he's saying. What is the failings? What is the failings of the weak? This is, to me, this is incredible. Go back one verse. Verse 23 of Romans chapter 14. Listen to this. But whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith. For whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. And then he jumps right into... Oftentimes it will benefit us to forget the chapter breaks and just to keep reading, because then we begin to understand what are the failings of the weak. For whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak. Well, the failings of the weak could ultimately be a shortcoming in their life. It could be sin. The failings of the weak could be anything from doubt to self-judgment to self-condemnation to sin. Whoa. And this opens up a whole new door. How do you deal with the sin of other people? And Paul gives us direction on how this is to happen. He says, well, don't please yourself. Right? Don't please yourself. Bear with the failings of the weak. Bear with the doubt of other people. Bear with the self-judgment of other people. Bear with their self-condemnation. Bear with their sin. Oh, and then the unfortunate part, their sin may affect you. Bear with that also. Let me open this up a little bit more. Go to Galatians 6. Galatians 6, verse 1 and 2. Give just a bigger picture of what this means. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, if anyone is caught in sin, you who are spiritual, you who are strong, should restore him. That's a word you can underline, highlight, restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted, because, hey, you're still human. Bear with one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. You see those words? To restore, in a spirit of gentleness, to bear with, to bear each other's burden. And what are these burdens? In the ESV, it labels them as transgressions, as sin. I love this word, restore. Wally's been working on a Mustang for about 10 years now. What is it, 67, 69, 63? Is older than him. But the restoring process has taken, about 10 years up to this point. He's getting close to finishing. You know what's not? I don't think this is the case. In his tool belt, in his restoring process, a sledgehammer. Right? I don't think you busted out a sledgehammer yet, because the moment you start swinging a sledge in a restoration process, you begin to destroy what you're restoring. And I love, that Romans 14, back up into verse verse 20. Do not for the sake of food destroy the work of God. To restore someone is to not bring out the sledgehammer and start swinging. You know what else Wally doesn't do is get a son of a Baconator and eat it in the front seat of his restoration project. All right, if he's got some greasy food, the first place he's not going is his new vinyl or new upholstery inside this Mustang. He's going to go and sit, in the garage and keep his distance from it because the car is being restored. He doesn't want to damage it with his freedom to eat what he wants to eat in his car. Okay, now we're not cars. How much more are we than a Mustang? And and the point being is this is, right, Paul's saying, do not for the sake of food, do not for the sake of your freedom, just go run over and destroy the work of God, destroy the restoration project that is in all of us. That is in all of us. You see, this is why Paul waits so long to use this word strong, because we don't want to jump too quick to the assumption that we're strong in faith, because there's an obligation to love that is rooted in Christ, that we'll see here soon, that is tremendous. And it means, at times, sacrificing the very things you love in order to build each other up, to restore them. Go to 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 14. Just one more view of this, what this looks like, and we'll move on. Paul says to the Thessalonians, he says, and we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle. All right, so there's not just watching this person and watching them in their sin and just keeping an eye on it, but there's an imperative to us to admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, but be patient with them all. You get the picture here that to bear with the failings of the weak takes time. It takes patience. It takes love. It takes encouragement. He goes on in verse 2 of chapter 15. He says, let each of us please his neighbor for his good, to build him up. Paul's not saying that we give lip service to our neighbor. Paul's not saying that we give eye service to each other, that we just please each other on the surface. The key here is to build them up. What are we building them up in? Are we just making them feel good about themselves? Hey, your hair looks good, right? Or I love your car, your 69 Mustang. You did a great job restoring that. That's what he's talking about. It's not that you just feel good externally. To build him up, go back, once again, keeping it in context. Verse 23 of chapter 14, I'll read it again. But whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith, for whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. I'm sorry. Back up to verse 22. Blessed is the one who has no reason to pass judgment on himself for what he approves. But whoever has doubts is condemned. To build one up is to release that person from that self-condemnation that their doubt has triggered inside of them. It's to put them, to walk with them back into the truth of the gospel. To build someone up who's stuck in sin is to take their hands and walk with them back into the freedom of the gospel. It's not to pull out a sledge and to destroy them. And I'm not saying that we never bring out the truth and we never reveal, hey man, this is not the way God wants you to live. But how we do that is with the utmost patience, is to carry that burden. It's to admonish the idle. It's to encourage the faint-hearted. It's to be patient with them all. And he locks this in. We can't stop at verse 2, right? Right? Because we can go home and say, we're gonna do this. We're gonna try harder to encourage each other, to love each other, to lift each other up, to build each other. And we can say, well, Okay, so next time I see someone doubting, I'm gonna walk patiently with them. I'm gonna hold their hand and bring them into the gospel. But we can't stop there. Because we have to answer the question, why? Why do we do this? How do we do this? What is our purpose? I mean, how can I, being on the same playing field as you, lead you into faith? Verse 3, Romans 15. For Christ did not please himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. And I know last week my mind was scattered. I lost a few of you. This week, probably similar. I sent my sermon to Nancy and Mark, and I rewrote it last night about 9 o'clock. You can see I got it in my office. Where it belongs right now, because to be honest, I'm trying to make sense of this myself. What Paul's quoting Psalm 69, verse 9 here. He says, the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. And he's referring this to Christ. He's saying Jesus did this. Jesus said, the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. I mean, what does reproach mean? It's to bear disgrace, shame. The reproaches, the shame, the disgrace of those who reproached you, the reproaches of those who shamed you, who disgraced you, fell on me. He said he's implying this to Christ. But we go to Psalm 69. Verse 9, and let's read it. This is a Psalm of David. This psalm is a lengthy psalm. It's David just crying out, God, I need your help. I'm worn out. Life, I can't take life anymore. Where are you, God? And 9 verses into it, in this kind of plead for help, he stops and he says this, For zeal for your house has consumed me. David said, I am so consumed with passion and fervor to see the house of God protected, to see it built up. For zeal of your house is consuming. Then he says, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. David saying, those who disgraced you, God, have disgraced me. Those who shamed you, God, have shamed me. I think this is the pivotal point of Psalm 69. This is why he's pleading for help. God, I've got nowhere to go. I've been taking hit after hit after hit. And I'm taking it from you. I got nowhere to go. Please help me. Help me out here. I need to hear your voice. I mean, maybe this resonates with you. God, where are you? How much more can I take before I'm out? I can't go much farther. This is why Paul waits so long to call himself strong. Because if we understand what is going on here, I hesitate to use the word obligation, but we bear an obligation as the strong to say this ourselves. Those who disgrace you, God, have disgraced me. And why? Because Jesus Christ, and my translation of that verse says, the buck stops with me. He's hanging on the cross. He says, Father, forgive them for what? They know not what they do. Father, forgive them because they are weak. Father, forgive them because in their doubt, they are crucifying your very Son. He didn't turn to the Father and say, why? Why are you doing this to me? He did not turn to the Father and blame the Father. He did not turn to those who were disgracing him, who were disgracing God, and blame them. He said, the buck stops with me. Romans 5 says this, for while you were still weak, another translation says, for while you were still sinning, Christ died for you. I mean, and the scatteredness of my mind. It's like, I want that to sink. Because if we can let this sink in, then we can begin to understand what is our next step. While you were disgracing God, Christ died for you. While you were out pleasing yourself, worshiping yourself, Christ died for you. And in that, He called you and said, I want to love you and I want to make you my child. And those who have turned to Jesus and have faith in Jesus and trust in Jesus are on a journey. Some may stay in this elementary stage, this weak stage, until they meet their Father in heaven. Some, the Lord will equip and will move them farther in their maturation and their faith. And those, He says, if you want to label yourself strong, if you are strong, He says, say this, the buck stops with me. You will walk with people in life that in their weakness, Christ died for them. And they will need to see that played out time and time and time and time again. They will need to see God's love brought to them in a physical, real way by someone being patient with them, by someone bearing with them, by someone admonishing them, by someone encouraging them when they're faint-hearted. But I'm going to tell you, as you know, doing that means you're going to be hurt. You're going to be let down. Words will be thrown out at you that may be geared towards God in their hearts. You could push away from them and lose patience. You could read Psalm 69 and say, God, I really just need your help in this. We could say the buck stops with me because Christ died for me while I was still weak. You see, this is why we can't stop at verse 2. Because when we see God's love permeate through the pages, I can now move forward. I can now understand to some extent, because I've seen it in my life, how I'm to treat with you, how I'm to live with you. And then we move into the purpose of this all is to unify the church in one voice, to glorify God, as he says in verse 6, verse 7. But it means some of us will get dirty. Some of us will be burned along the way. The reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me, which means the only one who's going to fill you back up is Jesus Christ. We got a song that we're going to sing here in a minute, Be Thou My Vision. Most of you know it. Nancy, we want to put up verse 4. It's kind of a little rendition. This is new for us. It says, this will be our verse 4. It says, Oh God, be my everything. Be my delight. Be Jesus my glory, my soul satisfied. I don't know the stories behind the faces this morning. I don't know what is going on in your life. I can't be up here and say, you're weak, you're strong. I think that's between you and God. All I can do is point you back to Jesus Christ. All I can do is root verses 1 and 2. Do not please yourself, please your neighbor, and what Jesus Christ has done. All I can do is say, hey, because you're loved, you can now love those who may not love you. We'll all have seasons of weakness. We'll all have seasons of doubt as a church, Midtown. We need each other. We really do. We need each other to not bicker about like opinions and doctrines, but we need each other to be like windows into God's love for us, to build each other up. I need you. I love our community group. Friday night, we're just sitting there. We didn't do any questions about the Bible. We just simply asked, how are we doing? It was a few weeks since we met, and we all got to just share how we're doing in life. You know, something that we don't really get to do here at church. And it was just a blessing to be able to put out on the table just certain things going on in life. And there were no answers, but just the fact that we bore each other's burdens. There's a little bit of admonishing. There's a lot of encouraging. It equipped us to move from Friday night into Saturday morning with joy. You know, I don't know. It just excites me. It excites me to see that we can be a church. Chris, you need to come up. We can be a church that gets this. And you're going to have to bear with me the next several months. There's some major processing going on up here. And I don't understand it all, but you're my church. And in my life, in my head, in my mind, in my life, in my relationship with Christ, there's a lot of processing going on. And unfortunately means Sunday morning that it's not all figured out, which maybe, hopefully, it'll never be all figured out, that in my life, I can just represent a man who is weak, who is leaning on Jesus day after day, week after week. And I don't want to exuberate a guy that thinks he's got it all figured out, because I'll leave here today, wake up tomorrow morning, and struggle with the fact that I slept in 30 minutes and I missed 30 minutes of reading my Bible. And then the rest of the day will be dictated by how I feel because I didn't read the Bible as much as I wanted to, or I didn't read it at all. I was supposed to wake up at 5 o'clock, man. Just bear with me for a moment. Just bear with me, all right? My alarm was set at 5 o'clock this morning. And I got an email at 10:30 last night, just something exciting. Which meant my brain started going. I stayed up till 12:30, which means I pushed my alarm clock to 6:30, which meant that I would not be studying my sermon for 3 weeks down the road, which meant I wasn't going to be able to go through my sermon this morning. And I come in here and I put up my music stand. I put my notes in my office. I said, all right, God. Looking at the clock, it was 11:10. I'm about done with my 3 points. And I said, God, it came for an hour service. What's going to happen here? And at the end of the day, I guess I'm just asking you to bear with me. To bear with each other. Because, as Glenn Beck said, it's not about focusing on our problems, it's about focusing on our struggles. Struggling through life together. And all of that, pointed back to Jesus Christ. What's my role here as a preacher? These are questions that just constantly are flooding my mind. I wish I could shut it off. I just can't, so I'm embracing it. What is my role as a preacher here? This week I said it's not to figure out the ins and outs of Scripture, all the finer doctrines, end times, or, just to have an answer for all the questions. It's to unite us back as a church in the truth of Jesus Christ. That's my goal. That's my ultimate goal. Beck and I were talking this week, and she was saying, Grace, she said, I just want to see lives change through this church. I just want to see people come to the Lord. I want to see people embrace God for the first time, to grow in their faith. And verse 1 through 3 of Romans 15, this is just how it plays out in real life. Let's get rid of the sledgehammers, and let's put on the coat of forgiveness. As Jesus stood on that cross and he said, Father, forgive them, as he's literally breathing his last breath. As Stephen did, as he's being stoned, Father, forgive them, as another stone hits him in the head. They don't know what they do. They're weak. I love the picture of forgiveness. Sorry, guys, I called you up. Now I'm rattling. Keep going, Ryan. I love the picture of forgiveness as I heard it put once. It's killing the sin inside of you. It no longer has effect over you or the person who committed it. It's killing that sin. And that can be hard to do. But that's okay because Christ did that literally on the cross. Just one day at a time, right? Yeah, it was kind of a smaller church trying to figure it out. But we can, through the power of Christ and His love, change the eternity of people in this community. People right here. If you're a soul care worker, you want to come up. Gene and Clark. These guys are amazing. We were at Christmas Eve service, and on the fly I said, "Soul care workers, come on up. We'll put a gospel presentation out there." And I just put all the cards today. And no one came up. And we struggle with the awkward. I mean, let's just be real, right? It's awkward if you two are standing up here like, "Clark, here, dude. Like, do I raise my hands and sing? I gotta keep my eyes open so in case someone comes up." And week after week, and so I was standing up there at Christmas Eve, and I said, "God," I said, we stand ready. We don't stand here figuring it out. We don't have it all figured out. We're just ready. These two are just ready. We try to figure out the music and the loudness of the music so we can do some praying up here, and it may be too loud sometimes, and walk you out that door. But if you got struggles on your heart this morning, you need help carrying them. You need someone to carry those burdens. These two stand with you.